All right, so my name is Derek Bell, and I am the Deputy Title IX Coordinator, or a Deputy Title IX Coordinator Investigator at UT Health San Antonio. I have four amazing women with me today who are here to be talking about ending domestic violence and also interpersonal dating violence. I have Lily Kasura, Amber Johnson Bryant, Leslie Schultz, and Patricia Castillo. Thank you all for being here today and adding to a conversation that honestly should never stop. It's one that should be ongoing, and I'm really excited to have you all here to talk about this. As you all know, October is Domestic Violence Awareness Month, but this is work that you all do year round. You've committed your lives to it, you have your experiences with it, your expertise in it, and so I think it's going to only add to a global conversation that needs to be had around how violence, domestic violence, and interpersonal dating violence affect individuals around the world. So thank you for what you're doing, for being here. To start today, what I'd like is for each one of you all to share a little bit about how your talents, your skills, your gifts, or your experiences have led you to want to commit your life to this work and what you do. So if I could, I'll start with Amber.
Hello, my name is Amber Johnson Bryant, and I am a licensed master social worker, and I work in hospice. So that's what I do for a profession. But I unfortunately, I'm a survivor of domestic violence. I was in a marriage that had various forms of abuse. And so I'm out of that, thankfully, and I've really committed my life to speak about it. So I'm very honored to be on this panel. I've been able to speak on, a podcast, and really a majority of my outreach has really been with friends and family and having that one-on-one conversation with my loved ones. And unfortunately, it's just something a lot of people experience, but I don't think quite understand the severity of it, especially the mental, the verbal, and the emotional abuse. And so I'm really just on a path of providing education any way that I can. I really want to be used, and I really want to shed light on this, because anything that is in the dark should be uncovered. A light should be on it at all times. So that's where I'm coming from.
Thank you so much, Amber. Leslie?
Amber, I just really appreciate how you highlighted that domestic violence, intimate partner violence is so much more than the physical. I think that's what is obvious to many of us, that domestic violence, intimate partner is violent physically, but it's also violent emotionally, sexually, financially, spiritually. And these homes are homes that our children and our next generation is growing up in. I saw a video one time that really impacted me, and it was animated, and it was of a house and a tree coming over the house and the limbs just entwining itself around this home. And then it became very dark. It went from a really happy animation to a very dark animation. And the ending line was, when you lock the doors in a healthy family, you're keeping danger out. When you're locking doors in a home where there's violence, you're locking the danger in. So my passion is people, children, men, women, across the board are survivors of domestic violence, someone that is intentionally trying to maintain power and control over another human being at all cost. And when I provide presentations for law enforcement, which our agency does quite a bit, I'm with Family Violence Prevention Services, and I'm the clinical director. I often ask law enforcement officers, I don't understand how we can expect our streets to be safe when our homes are not. And we've got to get to the core of our community, of our society, if we want to create a safe world. Domestic violence, intimate partner violence is like cancer. It's progressive. It's progressive in a relationship. So yes, I'm very passionate, and I love coming alongside, working with men, women, children that have experienced trauma due to domestic violence, and seeing that there is hope, not trying to be on the other end of the spectrum of trying to coerce people to leave, to change, but to come alongside and hopefully develop a conversation, as you were saying, Amber, of empowerment and shedding light.
Thank you so much, Leslie. And Lily, now if I could have you share a little bit about your background and what drew you to want to do this work.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm a domestic violence survivor, not from my marriage, but actually from college. And also a survivor of stalking, both violent and nonviolent. And there is a big difference there. I got my social work master's from UTSA a year ago this spring, and I'm now in the PhD program for applied demography. And I've done things with domestic violence off and on over the course of things. When I lived in Seattle, I used to help the domestic violence program there automate their legal documents. So residents could come in and just, get orders and things like that drafted and get some help. So that was really cool. Here, I worked on the Status of Women report. I was the co-author with Dr. Rogelio Saenz, and we were looking for figures on domestic violence from the police department and the county. And the county just gave us the answer that they couldn't give them because they didn't keep them. And so, of course, that was tremendously shocking. And even after we published a report, I just would not let that go, because that's not an acceptable answer in 2018 or 19 as it was. So I think there's been some progress on that since. I sat down on my own and figured out how to pull the court cases about family violence from the county court site. And I analyzed 100,000 felony and misdemeanor cases to figure out we have a lot of repeat offenders and we don't convict enough people. Those things were published as white papers. I do some work research-wise with women veterans, and sexual assault in the military is very tied seemingly to homelessness, not just for women veterans, but for male veterans as well. And currently I'm going to be working on the domestic violence survey of the community during COVID. There's some great stuff being done in Australia and England, and we have federal CARES Act money to do that through Metro Health. So I'm on the UTSA team to do that, and I can't wait. I think this is going to be really important stuff. So thank you for having me.
Absolutely, thank you for being here. And Patricia?
Well, basically, what happened to me was that this work found me back in 1979. And what happened to me, I got tackled and I got trapped into doing this work. And just by having visited the women's shelter of Bexar County, that's what it was called at that time, in 1979. And meeting the women who worked there, meeting some of the survivors who lived there, really just kind of captured me. And I soon started to make the connections between and the parallels to my upbringing and my experiences, but not as a survivor of intimate partner violence, because that didn't happen in my house. My parents didn't hurt each other or hit each other or things like that, but they were extremely violent to us in couched in the terms of discipline. And so we were victims of child abuse growing up. And so I started making the connection of child abuse to spousal abuse, intimate partner violence, family violence, domestic violence, right? And then I connected the whole issue of substance abuse to what was going on in people's houses, and the intersection with sexual abuse and violence, and onto community crime and sexism and toxic masculinity, and all of these things that are part of that larger picture of, domestic violence and how it plays out in our community. And then moving on into the fact that these crimes set us up to then be pushed into that prison industrial complex that exists in our country, where, we're the country with the largest prison population in the world. And you throw into that mix the whole thing about racism, because most of the people in the prison industrial complex are Black and brown. And so all of these things, just one thing after another, just kept capturing me and making me hang on, because you could clearly see all of those intersections coming together, rooted in family violence, profoundly rooted in family violence. And so pretty much, we've got an overwhelming number of Black and brown men in the prison industrial complex, but now it's starting to fill up also with women of color. I worked in the jail, Bexar County Jail, for 2.5 years, serving Black and brown women, mostly in Bexar County Jail. And, talking with them for 5 minutes, you immediately find out what their background is, what their childhoods were like, what they've lived and what they went through. And it all goes back to the legacy of family violence. And so that pretty much just has kept me hanging on. And then the fact that, my greatest teachers have been survivors. My greatest teachers have been, the women who came out of this stuff. And I tell you something, I've never learned the things that survivors have taught me. I didn't read them in any of my university books. I didn't get it out of my degrees. And I'm proud to have an LMSW, but my learning about domestic violence did not come out of, my LMSW work. And so it came out of community work with survivors and listening to them, shutting up and listening to them and hearing them teach me about what is needed in our communities, both at the micro level as well as at the macro level.
Thank you so much. I just to piggyback off of that, I think that's one of the things, that's why I wanted to do today's panel, was to create an opportunity for individuals who really just wanted to listen, who wanted to hear individuals who had a wide variety of different connection points to this work and to this topic, to just, hear. And even preparing for it, I had individuals share with me, here are some things that we would love to hear talk about. So going into that, of course, we talked about how physical abuse, I think, is one of the more apparent forms of abuse that many people think about when they think about domestic violence or interpersonal or intimate partner dating violence. We rarely talk about emotional or financial or exploitation of some sort, or even what I've identified online as cultural abuse. And that is sometimes if individuals practice a particular religion or practice or hold a set of cultural norms, that someone could even keep them from those practices. And again, it's another form of control and power that manifests in forms of abuse. And so I thought that was really important that we kind of touch on that. Many of you all have touched on it, even just in your introductions. So for the next 30 minutes or so, that's what we will kind of do, is talk about all of those different forms, how some of you all have seen it manifest with individuals that you've worked with, and then hopefully end off this panel today with some intervention strategies. One of the things I want people to walk away with is, what do you do? I know some individuals, again, who might be a little intimidated or scared when you see or are aware of physical abuse. But I think also, too, there's a level of not knowing what to do when you see financial abuse taking place. A lot of people tend to have this, that's not my business, or I don't know, I don't want to jump in without the right amount of facts or information. And that's something that I'm hoping that, from you all's experiences, you can share. Here are some things that I think you could do. So starting off, what I want to do was go to you, Lily, to set a foundation really around the research that's out there about domestic violence, specific to individuals in San Antonio, but definitely to speak nationally what you all are seeing.
So thank you. And I just wanted to point out this book. I don't know if you can see it. It's called No Visible Bruises: What We Don't Know About Domestic Violence Can Kill Us. The author, Rachel Louise Snyder, is an award-winning journalist, and it's really a great book. Last year, we gave copies to every elected official in the city and county, and hopefully they were reading them. But one of the things, based on what Patricia was saying, there's also a concern that she's now working on with Stanford Law School about women who are incarcerated and how many of them have domestic violence in their background. And we don't know because we've never asked. And so anecdotally, you could guess quite a few people do because it's such a stressor. But in Canada, they know the answer to that, and it's 67% apparently. So that needs to be something we ask here. There's an awful lot going on with this topic, and COVID for sure is exacerbating it. What apparently you see locally is that calls to the police department are up about it, but not necessarily transit to the shelter because people are worried about COVID. And so people are putting up with stuff that they may not have put up with before, and also just the financial issue of like people are being laid off, their literal occupations are disappearing during COVID. That's adding a ton of financial stress to the mix. And is that a way that perpetrators, or as someone said the other day, people who use violence, which is an even better phrase, are they being able to use that as a handle with people who are victims of that? And we know that, for example, child abuse, as Patricia was mentioning too, they've looked at that and they've realized that because the school situations have changed and teachers were normally kind of first responders there, they were able to report what they saw, but they're not running into kids in school and seeing bruises or hearing things that would make them so concerned. So child abuse is being reported less, although we know it's going up. And apparently what's happening is the dynamic is changing. You're having little kids themselves call in the reports, which is just unbelievable. And when people are showing up in emergency rooms, they've got more serious injuries than they would have before. So the pandemic, I mean, things were already bad, but then the pandemic threw a major, major curveball into this. So part of what we need to do with this survey is figure out, like, how is it exacerbating it? Help-seeking behavior, that's even different by race and ethnicity. We have a heavily Hispanic city here and with a lot of Mexican Americans, and help-seeking behavior there is different from in some other cultures. And I think with a lot of this stuff, we just need to be as culturally aware as we can be, because you can offer a solution or a tool, but maybe it's just for white middle-class women. And how great an idea is that? That's not necessarily going to help people. So I think this is the beginning of a much larger conversation that we could have. And it's awesome that we are. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. And talking about, kind of what we're seeing here in San Antonio, and you also mentioned how individuals use abuse. One of the things when Leslie and I were speaking, kind of preparing for this interview, Leslie mentioned about those who, I'll use your term, Lily, those who use abuse, and what some of them say is the reason for it. And I know many of you all have talked about childhood violence and violence starting out at a young age and individuals seeing that. Leslie, could you talk a little bit about that and maybe some other things that you've identified as reasons as to why individuals use abuse in relationships?
Right. Absolutely. If I may, I would like just to share one little thing in terms of what Lily had shared. At our Battered Women and Children's Shelter, we did see a dramatic decrease in hotline calls and coming to the shelter. And it was really, really alarming for us. And we understood that the stay-at-home orders, perpetrator was with victim, survivor, and they were not able to reach out and to make those calls. And as you said, the severity of injury that we saw, lethality, became even more apparent for us. And again, I worked with Child Protective Services. I'm the chair of the Adult Fatality Review Team here in Bexar County for domestic violence. And CPS states that teachers are the #1 reporters of child abuse, and they are the advocates for our children. And stay at home has increased their liability as well. So at one of the programs with Family Violence Prevention Services is our Violence Intervention Program, and it is designed specifically for offenders, people utilizing violence, or the PUV, but offenders of domestic violence, intimate partner violence. It is an accredited program, and we have programs not only for men, but for women as well. Typically, they are referred from Child Protective Services, the courts, perhaps probation, parole. And it's a 20-week program, and it really deals with cognitively trying to change attitudes and beliefs. Oftentimes, I did speak to our director because I really wanted to uncover, it's one thing for me to share what my opinion might be as to why offenders perpetrate violence against another. And I wanted to hear from her what has been reported in the groups that are taught here with our agency. The first thing that came to mind was just this male privilege, you know, the thought of male privilege. And I think that that does not come as a surprise to us. We are still dealing with male privilege, the sense of entitlement. And the second thing is that they have a need to control because they feel that they are above or better than their partner. They feel they know more, and that they, again, kind of coupled with that male privilege, they are able to exert their decision-making, their power and control over partner and or family. And a lot of it goes back to as well, they talk about, they have reported that they have felt intense jealousy, insecurity, lack of trust in their partner. And of course, we know oftentimes that which is reflected out is really an internal reflection of our own insecurities, and that they really don't want their partner to be taken away. Oftentimes, people think of domestic violence, intimate partner violence, as just someone losing control in the moment. But I find it really interesting because typically, where at least physical violence occurs on the victim survivor's body is where clothing can easily cover it up. The head, the arms, the torso. And it's not typically done in public. It's done behind closed doors. It's not typically done at a holiday dinner with extended family and friends. It's done in the privacy of their home. This is very thought out. It's very coercive. It's very strategic. So when I hear of anger management classes, I get a little angry. No, I don't. But I think that it's so much more than anger. This is a learned behavior. Probably close to 86% of the people coming through our VIP program grew up in a home in violence, that had violence. So again, we see this legacy, and I hear the word legacy, and I know that we want to think of legacy as being something cherished that we pass down from one generation to the next. This is a legacy that we want to eradicate. And it is like a generational curse. Little boys growing up in a home of violence will typically, most likely, statistically, it shows, will become perpetrators of violence. Women growing up in a home of violence most likely will become victimized in an adult relationship. And so we see this generational curse, and for both men and women in terms of perpetrating violence against another human being. It's about control. It's about a learned behavior. It's about an attitude, a mindset. It's what they know. You know, children live what they learn. We're all products of what we have learned. And so we've got to get to the heart of the matter on this. We've got to intervene.
Thank you so much. Amber, I would like to go to you. And one, I want to say thank you for being willing to be an open book. And again, as much as you are comfortable and willing to share your story. So thank you for that. Thank you for your bravery in that. Hearing what Leslie was just talking about, did you see some of these things were there signs in your marriage? Could you share a little bit about some of your experience and how that correlates to some of what Leslie mentioned?
Yes, absolutely. And it's an honor. As soon as I left that marriage, I said, I'm going to devote my life to talking about it, because when I was in it, I didn't tell anyone. I'm a twin. My own twin sister didn't know. My mom didn't know. People I was closest to had no idea what I was experiencing. And so I absolutely went through everything, you know, that you can imagine. It's all about power and control. And I know we're all familiar with that wheel, right? That talks about, you know, walking on eggshells, and then it's the blow up, and then it's a honeymoon period, and it's just cyclical. It goes around and around. And so the perpetrators are oftentimes extremely intelligent. And so they're able to just say certain things. And what I experienced, one of the biggest things that I experienced and that I learned about when I entered therapy was gaslighting, which is psychological manipulation. That was the biggest thing. Because I just always remember being so confused, you know, why, and I think I'm, you know, a fairly intelligent person myself. And at the time I was in my master's program. And so I'm thinking, what is going on? Why did I endure that? But it's really that just, it's a mind game. You know, they make you question your sanity. They say something didn't happen. Excuse me, say something didn't happen that did happen. They pit people against you. You wind up questioning your own friends and family because they say this person was disrespectful or this person was rude. And so I never had headaches. I just remember always just being so confused and just stressed out. My head was just throbbing all the time. And I would, you know, say, I didn't like the way that you talked to me. And then 10 minutes later, I'm the one apologizing, you know, and confusion was the ultimate thing that I experienced. I also experienced sexual abuse and verbal abuse, and just really, it's so, I feel like so many people experience this and they just have no idea how they were able to even enter into something like that. And for me, what happened was that I ended a long-term relationship and I was just heartbroken and I was really sad about that. And I wanted companionship and I wanted affection and I just wanted to have someone love me. And so this person, you know, wasn't charming or anything, you know, they pretty much gave me crumbs and I accepted it because I was just so hungry and so desperate for love and for acceptance. And so I tolerated it because first I didn't know that it was happening. But then also you always think things are going to get better. You think that, you know, it's the wheel. So when you're in the honeymoon phase and the phase that they're apologizing, you think, okay, well, maybe this time it'll actually last. And then when it gets on the eggshells, again, for me, I always thought everything was my fault because he said it was my fault. So I know we're going to talk about, you know, why didn't you leave conversation, but that's a big part of it, at least for me and the people that I talk to. It's not this easy thing, like you're fine and then the person punches you and then you call 911 and you leave. It's way more complex. So that's kind of my experience in a nutshell.
Thank you. So great segue into this conversation around why, you know, that was one of the questions that someone asked when I talked about, doing this panel is many people want to know. And that's one of the things I've had to sit back and educate myself on again and talking about just listening to whenever I hear people mention that or say, why didn't they just leave? I was like, well, maybe you should, sit back and listen to some of the reasons why. Because I think a lot of people don't understand. We talk about the financial aspect of someone taking all the money out of an account so that you aren't able to leave. I think, and Patricia
And
will come.
Derek,
Go ahead.
and it happens so far beyond that, is that usually the victim never has a right to get into those financial accounts. They're blocked all the way through. They're given a very minimal budget to get through on a week-to-week basis. So to having somebody just be able to wipe out a bank account, victim survivors typically don't have a lot of times access to the funds and the economics of the relationship. They have been in golden handcuffs for many, many years in the relationship.
That's a fantastic point. Is there any others who can say what are some things you've heard?
You know what else, Derek, is I've also had lots of cases that the women, it's one of the things that I always suggest to the women, that if they're considering leaving, that they need to get some money, get to the bank account, get the money. And these are women that, typically did have access to their bank account and shared the money in the bank account. And they always tell me, oh, he would never do that to me. He would never do that to me. And I'm like, please, maybe before he would never, but once he figures out that you're trying to move on, he will most definitely clean out the bank account. And I can't tell you how many women would call back and say, he took all the money. And then they're shocked and they're in utter disbelief that now they have zero access to the family resource.
And it's really difficult too, because we're talking safety planning now, having people get ready for possibly fleeing and leaving that relationship, which is at the highest point of lethality, risk of lethality to the victim survivor in that violent relationship. And it's very, very risky as well when you start. I had a client a couple years ago and was starting to secure documents, medical records, social security cards, and lo and behold, partner found all of her hiding places, was very aware of what money was coming out of their joint account, wanted to know where that money was spent. I had a client years ago that was given a very, very minimal budget to live on. Family, 3 children, 3 cars. She had to take the bus to and from work every single day, Monday through Friday, with the exception of 2 Fridays a month. And you know what those 2 Fridays were? Payday. And she had to go in, get her check, endorse it, give it to him. And people ask, why would someone do that? Because there's hell to pay, even worse, if not. And this was a family that by all, appearances, very involved in their faith community, just looked squeaky clean. No one knew what was going on behind closed doors. And she really, as Amber was talking about gaslighting, she felt like if she even tried to reach out, people would think that she was absolutely crazy, because the person that they knew or thought they knew would never, ever do what he did.
Yeah, so in hearing this, also too, what comes to mind is this barrier to holding those who use violence or perpetrators of violence, holding them accountable through the judicial system. I've a couple of friends and colleagues I know who are attorneys, who know others who specifically do family violence legal work. There's a sense of, restraining orders don't always work. There's just a lot of things that are not structured. The judicial system innately is not set up in order to protect individuals who have been hurt by violence.
Well, you also, go ahead, Lily.
So I just, in a personal situation with a violent stalker who I knew to be very dangerous, I actually did not get any sort of order because I didn't want to physically give my address up.
Absolutely.
And I just thought prevention, you know, having gone through it before with a non-violent stalker who still wouldn't leave me alone for across 3 state moves in 10 years, I kind of got schooled on how this works. It's all about prevention. And so I would not give up my physical address. I was too concerned about him working that some way or working through a friend who didn't really know the situation, because as Amber says, you don't always broadcast it to people at all. It's pretty weird and shameful in its own way. And so, yeah, I mean, you have to use discretion with this stuff. It can work for a lot of people. It might even work for most, but it's not a universal cure-all. You got to do your own diligence on it.
It can increase your risk for future violence and death. Absolutely. This is risky business.
Well, some of the barriers that I've seen, Derek, are that in all of our institutions, there is institutionalized sexism and misogyny. And it's so much easier to fall into that trap and just say things like, well, you know, maybe she, you know, doesn't listen, or maybe she, you know, didn't do as she was told, or maybe she just, you know, asked for it, because, you know, there's that whole provocation question, right? And it's so easy to just pin it on the victim and then be done with it and move on, you know, to the next issue, because that way you don't have to do anything about it. When it's the victim's fault because they asked for it, then you don't have to do anything. You know, she should have known better. And people just fall into that trap of victim blaming. And also, I hate to say it, but lots of people in the judicial system are completely clueless about the dynamics of domestic violence. They don't know how this stuff plays out. They don't know how it works. They don't know how persons who use violence manipulate the system and con people and charm people. And they just don't know. And they look at a handsome, tall, well-dressed abuser and say, not that guy. He would never do that. He's too good looking. Look at him. You know, did you see that impeccable suit he was wearing? You know, they're expecting this guy to look like a monster, you know, and they look just like anybody else, you know, just like a survivor. A survivor looks like anybody. It could be any one of us.
Any one of us, absolutely.
Any one of us. And so when people don't know how this stuff plays out, then why are they going to take it seriously? Plus, they don't know the other side of it, which is that macro side that I was talking about earlier. They don't understand how it's connected to all of those other forms of crime that impact our community.
Absolutely.
To the amount of billions of dollars of cost to our country's economy, well-being, and welfare. I mean, they just don't make those connections.
It's a domino effect, and it starts at the heart of the family.
Yes.
It's the heart of the family, and it rolls out from there.
Exactly.
So having the rich conversation I think we've had, and honestly, this is again a topic that you can spend 3 days, a week. This could be a full-on symposium about this subject matter, and we have been doing it in a 45-minute time frame. So with these last few minutes, I want to talk about, what do people do? I mean, again, you all have much experience, whether it be personally or professionally, around this work and this topic. What are some things that people can do when they are trying to intervene, when they're trying to be individuals who, when they notice something, they want to do something about it?
I think it's so important that I know that people have the best of intention, and sometimes that may look at as though it's rescuing. But we have to look at this continuum of power and control, because on one end, it can be very, very violent. On the other end, it can be very, very benevolent. And even the most benevolent, trying to perhaps talk someone into leaving, why it's important to leave, what they can do, coming alongside and being somewhat coercive in benevolent intention is again power and control. And so working with survivors of domestic violence, coming alongside, having conversations that develop a sense of voice and empowerment for that victim survivor to be able to make a plan that is best for them to step away from the relationship. Coming alongside, as Patricia was saying, listening to their life story without judgment, without opinion, accepting them where they are in that moment, so that they know if they return and come back to you, return and come back to our shelter, there is no shame. We expect that there may be a return to perpetrator, back to the shelter, and there is no judgment and no shame. We want to provide resources, empowerment, counseling, therapy, working with the children, the women, the men. I've worked with numerous men that have been survivors of domestic violence, and letting their story be their own, demonstrating compassion, eliciting what it is that they want for their life. And that's a new conversation because they've not experienced autonomy before. And it takes some time and it takes process. But the one thing that is essential is providing dignity and respect to that survivor, because that survivor is probably one of the most resilient, strongest people that you will ever meet. They have survived this long in difficult times. Listen to them. They know best. Okay, so I just get very passionate about this.
They are. They're the experts in their life, and people don't give them nearly an ounce of credit.
Absolutely.
People are stuck in, she's so dumb, she went back, that's what she gets, she must like it. You know, it's so easy to just fall into that mentality and not recognize all the skills and power and ability and capability it took to survive that experience and walk away from it. And people don't give them that credit. And that's what I always have to remind survivors. You know, think about all the things that you were able to tap into within yourself to be able to sit here in front of us and tell us your story.
Absolutely.
Because so many of them don't live to take that breath and tell their story. And so we really have to flip the coin and just say, you got it going on, girl, and my respects to you, because
Absolutely.
if you came out of that alive, you got it going on.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Amber,
The courage to share a story.
Amber or Lily, any other things that you would provide in terms of strategies or tips for folks who want to intervene?
Well, first I wanted to say thanks, Leslie and Patricia, for those words. It got me tearing up because I've been out of my situation for almost 3 years, but I'm so focused just with my own life, with working and things like that. I don't think about my situation all the time. And so hearing you guys speak about how survivors are resilient and things like that really.
Ugh, she froze.
Okay, sorry about that. So as far as advice, what I would tell people that are in the midst of it, I would say keep speaking, keep talking until someone listens. Yeah. Oftentimes when you speak about it, people aren't going to believe you because, like Patricia said, the tall, dark, and handsome person could never. And so keep talking, keep talking. For me, I saw a therapist before I left my ex-husband, and that really validated everything I was experiencing. And then for the people that are like the friends or family of the victim and soon-to-be survivor, I would say just stick with them. If you're a person of faith, pray for them. For me, my other sister who didn't know a lot about it, she
she said, Amber, I remember you describing the kind of person that you wanted to be with, and your husband is not that. And so that was helpful, just to say, hey, this isn't the life that I know that you want for yourself. Or if this was your friend, you wouldn't want your friend to stay with that, to stay in that kind of situation. So if you're an outsider person, just do life with that person and just keep loving on them, keep letting them know that you're present, and don't give up on them. I know it could be extremely frustrating because you just want to pluck them out of it, but know that they have to just slowly do it in their own time. But bottom line, just don't give up with them. Just that's just something I always say. I'm like, please stick with them. Just love on them. Just let them know that you're there and you see them. And I love what Patricia said. Ask them what's going on. Ask them to share about their story. What led you to this place? You know, they are the experts of their own story. And so if you slowly start to understand the reasons why they got into the situation, you'll have more empathy and compassion. And then I feel like that person will trust you as a safe person and perhaps would want to leave. So that's my 2 cents on that. I could talk about this forever.
And that's, you know, it's just that important of a topic. Before we wrap up, I want to give any last words. Again, I want to express my gratitude, and, you know, just thank you. I think that, you know, this is work that, in being in a Title IX role where we talk a lot about sexual harassment, sexual discrimination, but then also the parallels of domestic violence and interpersonal and intimate partner violence. It's important work. And before we wrap up, I'll have Lily share something.
Yeah, so thank you. I really wanted to wait and hear what other people had to say, because those were some great responses. I think some things that I think about are, leaving is a process. It's not a one-shot thing. It pays off to, like, take your time, get good advice, read more about domestic violence and family violence, understand when it's dangerous to leave, be strategic about it. Find people you can talk to about it, because I mean, it really isn't everyone. They can have some really bad responses to it, and you feel even more shut down when you've shared your truth with someone and they laugh about it, or, you know, turn the whole conversation because they're awkward about it. It's just, that can be really bad. So it's a process, and you want to be strategic about it. You also have opportunities, like you can text 911 now and let them know what's going on. Now you want to be careful about that, like, can your phone be grabbed by the person using violence? But Metro Health says you can put 911 in the to field on your phone and your text, and then in the text field include your location and the type of emergency, press send, and then be available to answer any follow-up questions or instructions that are texted back. That's a huge asset in this time and place. So thank you everyone for what you're doing, and I hope that we can really hold out more hope to survivors and victims, because I think the last piece that's on my mind is trauma. It traumatizes the onlookers, and seriously, as a survivor, it traumatizes you. So if people are going to critique you and say, I can't understand why you're making poor decisions, they should have a better understanding of what it does to your brain. It puts you in a complete panic, and panics aren't conducive to thinking clearly and strategizing clearly. This is just a fact of it, and it's traumatizing anyone else who's observing it. So it's a public health issue, bottom line.
It really is. And I think the last thing I'll add for all of those who view this video and this panel is to do your part in getting educated. We have the internet at most of our fingertips. Have access to libraries when we get back into a normal life, but there's so much information out there about how you can be a good bystander. I think even educating yourselves on different services offered in your local state arena, but then also know about national hotlines, know about information where you can at least point individuals in the right direction if you want to do something that, you know, doesn't feel like you're inserting yourself so much, but to say, hey, I notice these things are happening, sharing these resources with you, so that anytime you feel like you want to use them, feel free to do that. So
May I give the hotline number, the 24/7, 365 hotline number to the Battered Women and Children's Shelter?
Absolutely.
That number is 210-733-8810. 210-733-8810. That's not just for if you're needing to flee and need shelter, but we're here for resources. We have legal support. We have non-residential counseling, a wide range of services. We are here for you.
Thank you so much. And what I'll do is when we share this on social media platforms, we will share out you all's different resources or agencies that you work with.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. You all have a fantastic day.
Thank you,
Thank
Deirdre.
you.
Thank you, everyone. It was nice to meet you all.
You too.